that my voice carries, which is another way of saying it's loud. But raise your hand in the back if you can't hear me. I'm delighted. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with the Yali Mandela Washington Fellows, and it's a particular honor to open this session on the agency and autonomy of women. And I have to say, while I'm delighted to be here with all of you, I'm particularly happy and pleased to see men here in the audience. So welcome especially. Please forgive me, ladies, but welcome to the men. And why do I say that? That's because when the topic is the empowerment of women, ways to enable women to use their gifts to contribute fully to society, we women often find ourselves talking just to each other. And that can be important, no doubt, that can be important. But too often, men are missing from a discussion that is of great value to all of us, men and women, all humans. You know, I'm not in the habit of quoting communist leaders. I was a Cold Warrior for the first half of my career as a diplomat, but I will quote Chairman Mao Zedong of the Chinese Communist Party, who said in 1955, famously, "Women hold up half the sky." And I love that quote, as you'll hear. And of course, what he was saying is, at the time, women in China were a huge, underused resource, and that the China needed to allow them to use their talents to benefit everyone. Now, there's a lot of compelling evidence for Chairman Mao's statement, a lot of evidence that shows that engaging women more in the economic, social, and political life of the community benefits everyone, men too. For instance, lifting up women contributes to peace, and we all know that peace is the very foundation of all the other good things in life. About 10 years ago, Dr. Valerie Hudson published a book called Sex and World Peace. And the book, she's a scholar, and the book was based on evidence, and she found that, and I'm quoting, "The very best predictor of a state's peacefulness is not its level of wealth, its level of democracy, or its ethno-religious identity, which is often seen, as we all know, as a cause of conflict. No, the best predictor of a state's peacefulness is how well its women are treated." And Dr. Hudson also cited evidence that the status of women is the best predictor of a particular country's health, economic growth, lack of corruption, and other very positive social indicators. According to UN statistics, just closing the gender gap in education, and by the way, we've made great progress on that, but there's still a ways to go. Just doing that one thing would add about 0.5% to a country's per capita gross national product. And of course, as the economy grows, men and boys benefit along with women and girls. And here's a sensitive topic. When women work, they invest more of their income back into their families than men typically do. In fact, studies have shown that women are likely to spend about 90% of each dollar they earn on food or shoes or books, compared to about 35% for men. And you know, I've always wondered why this is. I do not believe, having met a lot of men and women all around the world, I do not believe it's because women love their children more than men do. I simply don't believe that. No, what I think is that this gap in how women spend money is related to the consequences of the rigid definitions of the roles of women and men. So men are not expected to be seen to care as much as they do. And that's not good, again, for anybody, especially not for the children. And I just recently read about another, almost invisible, insidious way in which discrimination against girls may actually harm boys. And that is because it may undermine our sons' ambition if they don't have to, compete, if they don't have to work as hard to be the best they can be. And I realize I'm talking to people who probably already know all this, but greater gender equality is associated with better education and health, higher per capita income, faster and more inclusive economic growth, and greater international competitiveness on the part of a particular country. In fact, many of you know about McKinsey, the consulting firm, and they did a study a couple of years ago that says that closing gender gaps in the labor force could add between 12 and 25% to world GDP by the year 2025. So those are some of the reasons why I really like that quote by Chairman Mao, that women hold up half the sky. It's a fact that half of us are women, and the world has to be better off if our half of the sky shines bright above all of us. So let's say we agree that the talents and efforts of both men and women are needed to build the kind of world in which we all want to live. What does that mean in practice? Well, I think it means two things. First, ending violence and human rights abuses against women, and then encouraging their participation in our economies and societies, the agency and autonomy that are the title of today's event. The preamble to the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, and this is a quote, "Recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world." But though we women are clearly members of the human family, human rights abuses against women and girls are tragically common. Again, I want to be very clear here. Men and boys suffer from human rights abuses too, much too often. But the abuses I'm referring to now are those perpetrated just because certain people were born female. Now, women and girls may actually be protected by the laws of the country where they live. And the laws on paper, in other words, legally, these protections usually do exist in today's world. And the laws mirror international conventions that enshrine equality for women. But in practice, these laws are often ignored and rarely enforced. A very good example of this gap between law and practice as it applies to human rights abuses against women and girls is the subject of the film you're about to see, a very sensitive subject, the topic of female genital mutilation. And in fact, it's most prevalent in Africa. 22 of the 28 countries in Africa where FGM is practiced have legislation criminalizing it, not just prohibiting it, but criminalizing it, and yet it still happens. So the answer is clearly not just making national legislation consistent with international practice and with President Carter believes, with the morality of all the world's major religions. An estimated 55 million girls in Africa under the age of 15 have undergone this procedure or at risk. And half of them live in 3 countries, Egypt, Nigeria, and Ethiopia, all of which have strong laws against this practice. So I just want to emphasize that one of the problems here is the gap between the legal regime, what's on paper, and what actually happens. Just to go on a little bit on this idea that women suffer human rights abuses, in many cases just because they are women, or that their gender is related to disproportionate human rights abuses. For instance, more than 70% of all victims of human trafficking are women and girls. And of course,
As you might imagine, most of them are destined for forced marriage or the sex trade. And 75% of AIDS cases in sub-Saharan Africa are women and girls. Another problem for all of us, again, I say this is a problem for all of us, is that child marriage is still practiced. And most of the time we're talking about child brides. Again, there are abuses of boys, but most of the time we're talking about girls. And there are at least 250 million women in the world today who were married before they were even 15. And of course, many, many millions were married even younger. And why is this a problem? There are two issues here. One, it seems wrong to bring a child into, the most adult of institutions, marriage. But there are practical reasons why it's wrong as well. Child brides are much more likely to be exposed to domestic violence, and they are more likely to die in childbirth. And the children they have when they're young, 12, 13, 14, are less likely to survive and thrive. And that, of course, is the boy children as well as the girl children. So it doesn't really build a strong family to have a child bride. And I mentioned domestic violence, which does tend to be worse against child brides. But I want to digress here. There are many parts of the world, even in the United States, we do not prohibit marriage below the age of 18. There is religious pressure from some conservative fundamentalist communities not to do that. And I'm embarrassed to say that even the United States doesn't really follow the international guidance on this matter. But I want to tell a story about my time in Bangladesh. I served there some years ago, and there are many ways in which women in Bangladesh have had to really work to be part of the community. But many women have improved their lives in the last couple of decades by getting jobs making garments in the textile sector. I'm not going to tell you these jobs are perfect, but I am going to say that grown-up women make their own choices, and they decide that it's better for them to have these jobs than not to. Because the ability to earn an income reduces the incentives for early marriage, provides women in villages with more decision-making power at home, and a greater voice in community affairs, and improves self-esteem. And one less talked about result, and of course more income to spend on the family, so the kids are more likely to stay in school. All of this is obvious. But one less talked about result of these women's decision to work is, and I learned this from talking with some of these women, frankly, husbands are less likely to beat wives who bring home an income. Tragically, at the beginning of COVID, we saw a large increase in domestic violence. On a happier note, the percentage of girls in primary school, where they belong, where all children belong, in my view, has gone up to 86% worldwide. But there are still tens of millions of girls who are not in school for various reasons. Now, there are millions of boys in some countries who are not in school. There are some countries where the boys are the goat herds and the shepherds, and they are kept out of school, and that's tragic too. I hope you know that all children should be in school. But more women than men are illiterate because for many years, women were far less likely to go to school, and they were taken out early because they were girls. And yet, this is something that we've known for many decades. The single most important predictor of a country's economic development is the education of girls. And this has been kind of a lesson that we've known for a long time. I'm going to tell another story from my travels. This is when I was at the Carter Center. I traveled to Liberia. The Carter Center has many programs in Liberia. And I met a lovely woman. Her name was Mabindu. And she told me that in her village, rural women had been considered the property of men. and only gained more independent status and the right to own land early in this century after the Civil War ended. But, Ma Bindu said to me, and she was laughing when she said it, although it's not really that funny. She said, well, I said, well, that's great. She said, well, yeah, not so great. She said, most of the women still don't know about these new rights because they cannot read, and the men in the village, the few men in the village who can read, haven't bothered to mention the change in the law to their mothers and wives and daughters. So she was laughing when she said it, but it has a dark side as well. I want you to realize, as we think about how women are going to hold up half that sky, you need to realize women are poorer than men. And often that means children are poor too. Girl children, boy children, little girls, little boys. And this has only gotten worse with COVID, which has pushed more than 100 million people back into extreme poverty. And I just read that COVID has cost us, and this will be a particular issue in Africa, 3 to 4 years of progress in eliminating extreme poverty, which is defined by the World Bank as having to live on less than, I think it's $1.90 or $2 a day. All right. So I'm coming to the end here. I know it was supposed to be a short introduction, but I want to emphasize that we need to end the many abuses of women and girls that still take place. And we also need to go a step farther and empower women to change their communities in ways that will benefit all of us. When women become actors in societies, you do begin to see significant changes. And I want to give 2 quick examples of the importance of allowing and encouraging women to help solve problems. And the 2 spheres I'm going to mention, I won't go on, but the 2 spheres I want to mention are ending conflict, because as I said before, without peace, no other human aspiration can flourish, and saving the environment. Nearly 20 years ago, actually more than 20 years ago, the UN Security Council unanimously adopted Resolution 1325, which recognizes that women's exclusion from peace negotiations not only contravenes their rights, because of course they've suffered from the war too, but also reduces the chance for success. So we know now that peace agreements reached through a process that includes women are more likely to be reached and more likely to last than peace agreements reached among the men with guns, the combatants only, okay? But despite that evidence, women are still rarely invited to the negotiating table. And I say, what a waste of talent and what a risk to peace. The need to draw more on the efforts of women also applies to the most pressing problem of our time, in my view, the climate crisis. And here again, we have the old story of women as victims of abuses and the new story of women as agents for change. Now, women, because, as I said before, they tend to be poor, are especially vulnerable to the effects of climate change. 80% of people displaced by climate change, by desertification, and that, of course, is particularly true in northern sub-Saharan Africa and southern northern Africa. 80% of those people are women with children, according to the United Nations. Now, the increase in climate-related natural disasters, particularly storms, takes an acute toll on women. When women lose their homes, in other words, when their homes are washed away or destroyed in some kind of natural calamity or even by war, they are more likely to be sexually assaulted. And families, after a disaster, families that are now poorer than they were before the disaster, are more likely to marry off their daughters at a young age because, of course, they can't support their family anymore. It becomes harder to get health care, and maternal mortality rates increase. Several years ago, my former boss at the Carter Center, former US President Jimmy Carter, wrote an op-ed entitled,
how empowering women and girls can help solve the climate crisis. And what he said, in a nutshell, is that in most countries, women bear the largest burden of the gathering of food and preparation of food and water as well. And that means, said President Carter, that women are on the front lines. They see how things have changed. They see how this water source has dried up. They're the first ones to know they have to walk an extra mile to find water. And because of that, they are also the first people who may be able to find ways to combat this or to work together to help turn around this terrible danger that we all face. So, again, why waste the ideas that women might bring to solving this important problem? And as all of you know, the world is in a particularly precarious position right now. We have more problems to solve than I've seen in my time in public life. And I entered the U.S. diplomatic service in 1975, before most of you were born. And I have never seen the world in worse shape. So we have, and by we, I think I mean you, have a lot to do to get us back on the right path. And the problems, I talked about conflict, I talked about climate, but we've got pandemics, we've got political problems, we have all kinds of problems, and many of them are quite acute on the African continent because of poverty and conflict. But in my view, people faced with acute problems are more likely to come up with solutions. And so that means that young leaders from Africa, where the world's problems are acute, are going to play an outsized, a larger role in building a sustainable future for all of us if African women are empowered to hold up half of that sky. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Peters. The world, but particularly in Africa. And from early child marriages, the female genital mutilation issue, poverty, and even the impact from climate change. So now we're going to pivot over to Tamlin Hall, who will introduce the film we are about to see. And I'll tell you a bit about Tamlin as he comes up. Tamlin Hall is the Humanitas Prize winner for television writing, Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation Film Fellow, and Georgia House of Representatives honoree for advocacy and the arts. After receiving the MFA in screenwriting from UCLA, Tamlin directed his first narrative feature film, Holding On, which is how I met him from that film. And that film won several awards, including Dances with Films, Atlanta Film Festival, Breckenridge Film Festival, Orlando Film Festival, South Bay Film Festival. The film garnered high acclaim for its authentic depiction of dual diagnosis. Holding On was shortlisted by the Georgia Film Critics Association for the Oglethorpe Award for Excellence in Georgia Cinema. Upcoming projects include producing a 6-part PBS documentary series, Hope Givers, and co-writing the screenplay adaptation of the #1 New York Times bestseller, A Child Called It, for the Oscar-nominated production company, For Good. Hall founded the nonprofit I'm Holding On and currently serves as a part-time faculty member in the University of Georgia MFA Narrative Media Writing Program. And also, I want to mention that one of our Hope Givers documentary series won a Regional Emmy Award, of which we are absolutely very proud of. And in full disclosure, I am the board of directors at Hope Givers, so I am proud that this happened. So I am going to turn it over to Tamlin to introduce the film. You know, and we hope you all can feel free to spread out a little bit. Everybody likes to congregate together, but you can move over some to this side.
And we are live. Yes.
Okay, tell them, but yeah, you want to move over some. This is the age of social distancing.
Well, I think if anybody can't hear me, let me know. I think my voice carries as well. You know, I really love this program. I love the Mandela Waxing Fellowship program so much. The first film that I did, Holding On, was about my friend growing up. I grew up in a small town, rural town in Georgia, and I was bullied a lot. And I didn't really have any friends, and there was a guy a couple of years older than me who made me laugh, made me feel like I belonged in this world, and brought me joy. He would give me rides whenever I asked, and his name was Holden Layfield. And Holden died by suicide. He was 19 years old, and I just felt compelled. It was something about like life. Sometimes like hey, there's something inside that you feel compelled that you've got to do something. That there's some advocacy, there's some cause, there's something that's just driving you, whether it's God or whatever you believe in. And I reached out to his family and I asked permission to tell Holden's story. I wrote them a 13-page handwritten letter. That was in 2007. I was living in Los Angeles, and I mailed it to Georgia, to where they were living, and they took a vote as a family, and they said yes. So I don't know, as a career-wise, you know, I got my undergrad degree in agriculture. I shouldn't be up here telling stories, you know? But one thing that I tell my students at the University of Georgia and Emory is that it's your journey. There's never a destination, and you just keep going. And what that is, if you're passionate about something, and if there's a purpose, then go for it. Leap and the net will appear. And that's why all of you are here today for everything that you're doing in your countries. That is so important. So remember that. Remember that drive, remember that purpose, and remember that service for others. And that's why I'm here. I was lucky enough to get invited. I didn't know Dr. Hill at the time in 2018 to come and screen that film Holding On for the Mandela Fellows. And after that film, we really had it was pretty much a group hug. It was 35 of us talking about family and talking about personal stuff. And so one of the Mandela Fellows at that time wanted to do a documentary in Sierra Leone. And so we started working on some stuff, and then the next year we screened the film again, and then Dr. Hill got me in touch with Ann, who was here as a fellow in Kenya. And so we applied for the Reciprocal Exchange Program grant. We got it. And so we started during COVID. It was right before COVID is when we applied for the grant. And then COVID happened. And the film that you're about to see, and one thing that I think that the world works in mysterious ways, and you just say yes, and don't try to second guess it, and just have that understanding of that this is the way it is, and I'm just saying yes, because I think my biggest fear for this film that you're about to see was that when we first started talking about it was I was going to direct the film, and we're talking about a topic that's very sensitive, that has hundreds and hundreds of years of history. I'm a white male from America, and I thought to myself, man, I'm not the right person for this one. And I believed in the story, though, and I believed in the cause, and I believed in what we could do. And so in that, I'm passing the baton over to somebody else, because it's their story and their perspective and that authenticity, and I can be and I can complement with my skill set what that is. So we worked with the filmmaking team in Kenya. Mark Wambui directed it, and Noni, she wrote it, and she was with Mark the whole time, and we worked with Ann. And at one point, I remember Ann said, "You've got to get my friend Selena in this documentary." And we were about 2 weeks before filming, and we were like, "Oh no, we already got our cast. Like, we're like 2 weeks away." And she was like, "You just got to meet her." And so we took a Zoom, and immediately I was like, "Oh, she's gonna be in our film." She just popped. You can feel it, and you'll see it when you meet Selena. Selena ended up being our protagonist, and that's it. And you'll see kind of why, and we can talk about this afterwards of how this whole film and this whole story took place, but it really, I'm very lucky to be a part of this, and I can't thank Dr. Hill so much for everything that she does. She's a leader, she's a friend. I admire everything that she does, and every one of you are so lucky, and know that, that in this entire country, of all the places that you could have gone with the fellowship, you came here. There's a reason for that. So, yes.
So my last one, by your own definition, how would you simply